Chess. You know, it's so much more than just a game. It's this incredible 1,500-year-old story of strategy, of power, and really of human ingenuity. In this explainer, we're going to uncover how a war game designed for Indian kings somehow transformed into the global obsession that we all know and love today. All right, let's dive right in. We'll kick things off by asking why this game has such a hold on us. Then we'll march all the way back to its origins as a four-limbed army in India. We'll follow its journey as it was transformed in Persia, totally reimagined in medieval Europe, and then standardized for modern competition. And finally, we'll get inside the mind of the modern player. So to get started, our whole journey really begins by asking one simple question. I mean, really, what is the secret? How did a game with just 64 squares and 32 pieces become this timeless worldwide obsession? Well, the magic of chess is really its incredible ability to adapt, to become a mirror for the very cultures that fell in love with it. Okay, so our story kicks off way back in the Gupta Empire of 7th century India, where chess wasn't just a game, it was literally a war simulator. This early version of the game was called Chaturanga, and the name itself is a huge clue to what it was all about. In Sanskrit, it means four divisions, and it was designed as a tool for strategy, a way to play out real military tactics right there on the board. And those four divisions, they were a direct reflection of the actual Indian army. You had the infantry, which, you guessed it, would eventually become our pawns. You had the cavalry, our knights, the powerful elephantry, which would later evolve into the bishop, and the swift chariotry, which was the direct forerunner of the modern rook. The game was played on an 8x8 board, which was called an ashtapada. But here's a really key difference from the chess you and I play. The kings, or rajas, they didn't face each other directly. The white raja started over on e1, while the black raja started on d8. Kind of weird, right? So, like any great idea, the game didn't stay put. It traveled along trade routes from India and right into Sassanid Persia. And there, it wasn't just adopted, it was completely transformed. The Persians called it Shatranj, and they started to write down the rules that would lay the groundwork for the game we all play today. The Persians really fine-tuned the game's balance. That super powerful Indian minister piece, it was weakened into the furs, which could only move one measly square diagonally. The elephant became the alfil, with a quirky two-square diagonal jump. But the chariot, the rook, was solidified into the powerful piece we now know and love as the rook. Now, this is where things get really fascinating visually. When chess finally makes its way to medieval Europe, it gets a dramatic cultural makeover. The abstract, symbolic pieces from the Islamic world were about to be reborn as kings, queens, and knights, creating some of history's most treasured artifacts. And you just can't talk about medieval chess without talking about the amazing Lewis chessmen. They were found on a remote Scottish island, but these stunning pieces were actually carved way back in 12th century Norway from walrus ivory and whale teeth. They just perfectly capture this unique moment in the game's evolution. The Europeans gave the pieces brand new identities that reflected their own society. The alfil's 2 points, for instance, reminded them of a bishop's mitre. So, it became the bishop. The rook was transformed into this fierce warrior, or warder. The game's characters really came to life, with these stern-looking kings and thoughtful, contemplative queens. And there's this one detail that is just so cool. It powerfully connects these pieces right back to their Norse roots. 4 of the warders are carved biting their shields, which is the iconic battle rage of the berserkers from the Norse sagas. Absolutely incredible. Now, as beautiful as masterpieces like the Lewis chessmen were, they were, well, pretty impractical for competition. As tournaments and chess clubs started popping up, the game desperately needed a standardized design to evolve into a serious sport. In the 19th century, this was a huge problem. I mean, just imagine trying to play a serious tournament where every single board is different. One set has a rook that looks like a tower, another one has a chariot, and a third has a little warrior. It was confusing, totally impractical, and a massive barrier to widespread competition. And then the solution arrived in 1849. The Staunton set. It was named after the English chess master Howard Staunton, and this design was absolutely revolutionary in its simplicity. Each piece was distinct, it was stable, and it was instantly recognizable. See, it wasn't designed for artistry, it was designed for clarity and practical play, and it quickly became the universal standard for chess tournaments everywhere. So, with a standard set in hand, players could finally focus on a shared language of strategy. And this led to an absolute explosion of theory, including the Gambit, this bold, daring opening where a player sacrifices a piece to gain some kind of long-term advantage. Take the Danish Gambit, for example. White offers up one pawn and then another. To a new player, it looks like a huge mistake, right? But it's a trap. By sacrificing that material, White is hoping to blast open the board for a swift and deadly attack. This long, deep history of strategy hasn't just shaped the game. It's also shaped the players. In modern chess, analysts don't just study the moves on the board. They study the minds behind them. Yeah, modern chess theory often sorts elite players into four main types. First, you've got the activist, like Garry Kasparov, a dynamic attacker who's always pushing for the initiative. Then there's the theorist, like Vladimir Kramnik, who plays systematically and relies on tons of preparation. You also have the reflector, like Anatoly Karpov, a really subtle positional player. And finally, the pragmatist, like the legendary Bobby Fischer, who relies on concrete, cold, hard calculation above everything else. And a perfect example of the pragmatist in action is Bobby Fischer's Game of the Century from 1963. In this ridiculously complex position, Fischer's ice-cold calculation allowed him to see a winning combination that nobody else could, and it led to one of the most legendary victories of all time. So, from a simulation of an Indian army to a psychological battleground for global grandmasters, chess has clearly never stopped evolving. And now, with the rise of artificial intelligence and whole new generations of players, it really begs the question: have we reached the peak of this 1,500-year-old game, or is its greatest chapter actually yet to be written?